Hello, welcome to the Path 11 podcast. I am your host, April Hanna. I am also the co-founder of Path 11 Productions, and aside from podcasting, we also make great films and documentaries, which can be found at path11productions.com. We have a special promo code just for our podcast listeners. The promo code is Path11Podcast, and if you go to our website, path11productions.com, and visit our shop page, put that promo code in, and you will receive 50% off of our Evolution DVD, which is the third film in our Path Trilogy series. If you would like to become a sponsor of the Path 11 podcast, please email me at info@path11productions.com. And now for this week's show. So today I am joined with author Lisette Schuitemaker. She founded and ran and sold a communications company before becoming a healer, life coach, and personal development author. She studied the work of Wilhelm Reich as part of obtaining her BSc in Brennan Healing Science. She is the co-author of The Eldest Daughter Effect, and she also lives and works in Amsterdam, Netherlands. Today we're going to be talking about her newest book, The Childhood Conclusions Fix. Welcome, Lisette.
Yeah, thank you. Hi.
Hey, so you had quite a journey, huh? Starting off in the field of communications and then, moving into the Brennan Healing Science. Those are, wow, two pretty separate things. So I was hoping you could introduce yourself a little bit more and take our listeners on a little bit of the ride of your life and tell us how you got where you are now.
That's a great question. Well, how I sometimes explain it to myself is when I was in communications, I did a lot of internal communications within corporations. In the 80s and 90s, they were just, big business was discovering that people were actually a very valuable asset. And when you talk to them and let them know where you are headed as a company, they can develop alongside with you. And so that was internal communication within corporations. And then I turned my attention to internal communication within people themselves. How do we actually communicate with ourselves? Because my distinct impression is there's no one in our lives we talk to as much as we talk to ourselves. So how mindful are we in what we tell ourselves? Because what we tell ourselves determines how we feel and how we function in the world. So that's why I went and retrained. I had studied classics, Greek and Latin, when I was young. I really started at the source of our culture, then went and did communications, then did these healing studies, and actually having worked in the field of communications and then becoming a life coach and a healer now comes together in the books I write.
Yeah, and I enjoyed this book because it's interesting. After I read it, I do psychotherapy as well, and when I was referencing back to some of these childhood conclusions that we're going to talk about in just a little bit, I was like, oh my gosh. You really can narrow everything down in these 5 conclusions that we somehow, and I'm sure that you'll talk about this too, that kind of comes from childhood and we play it out in our adult lives.
We do. And until we become aware of them. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I'm just going to let the listeners know what these 5 conclusions are. And I'd like you to kind of take us through the journey of each one to kind of describe how this negative self-talk kind of comes in, what we can do to try to replace this through adulthood. Because, the other part of the title of your book is turning the negative self-talk around. And I have found that many times people are their own worst enemies when it comes to their own self-talk. And I remember listening to a lecture from Louise Hay, who was very big into, affirmations and did a lot of teaching in that. And I remember her saying it's just as easy to think a positive thought as it is a negative one. It's just kind of shifting that perception, that focus, and practice, because it is practice. So these childhood conclusions, and I'd like you to talk about, too, kind of how you came up with the conclusions. And I know that you rename them. But the first one is, I am not welcome. I must go elsewhere. The second childhood conclusion is, there isn't enough, I am not enough. The third, what do I know? Have it your way. The fourth, I must be in control. And 5, I must conform to fit in.
Yes.
So
doesn't really make you happy when you read them like this, does it?
I know. So maybe you can, take us from the beginning. How did these childhood conclusions begin to develop? And how do they become so strong within our field that we carry them throughout our lives and play them out into adulthood if we're not aware of them?
Yeah. So, let's imagine, a newborn. Really, really newborn, just come into this world. And let's also assume that there is a world of spirit, and the world of spirits is huge and vast, and somehow some part of it incarnates on Earth and kind of looks at this little body and goes like, well, that's a really tiny body to kind of fit myself into. And that it bodily, physically, a very young baby might get impressions that somehow it isn't really wanted. It needs some reassurance, some holding from the parents, human contact, cuddling, and for some reason also the way we organize childbirth, put it in a crib that's plastic and cold. It may get the impression, oh la la, something has gone wrong here. I should not have come. I should not enter this body fully. And I don't really want to be here. I don't belong here. I'm not welcome. And just because that is such a painful feeling, everywhere, even we as adults, when you come into a party and you don't kind of immediately, everybody is clustered and having a good time and having conversations, and you can't immediately find your way in, we again get this feeling, oh, everybody belongs here but me. I shouldn't have come. I should have just stayed home or not come at all. Kind of a shrinking back into ourselves, what we do, and we kind of become a bit sad, and but also maybe a bit aloof. We go away a little bit. We kind of go into a world of fantasy where things are harmonious and wonderful. And so that's all the part and parcel of that first very young childhood conclusion. And of course, that conclusion is not made by a baby in words. It's still a long time before we have words. So it's more kind of this it's very physical, actually, this first sense of everybody belongs but me. So that's the first one, and I can continue through the others unless you.
Yeah, I would like that. I'd like you to continue through them, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more in depth. Sure. Okay.
So then the second is still a very young child that needs to be fed regularly, because we are like, as babies, we are like organisms, and our instinct is survival. So when we wake up, we need some energy. We wake up from a lack of energy. Some energy needs to go in, some food, some nourishment. And if that is not instantly available, we will kind of make some noises, then we will start to cry, then we will start to wail, we'll wave our hands, our arms, and our little feet. So we're actually expending energy whilst we are in need of food that we need in order to grow and to make these new neural pathways in our brain. So the baby gets into a frenzy. The baby really experiences a fear of death because it has no concept of time. A mother might be somewhere else in the house saying, okay, well, I've just done it. Well, I will be there in 10 minutes. And that's all very reasonable. But a baby does not have a sense of time. So we might experience this again. I, for instance, would experience this when I was in a queue, and or when I'm somewhere and nobody is paying attention, like I'm in a restaurant and I've been given the menu, but the person waiting doesn't come and then passes my table again, and I see that person is busy, but yet in me starts this, oh, if she doesn't come now, I will die, which of course is not true as an adult, but for the little baby, that is really the truth as it experiences it. So that's the second conclusion then. There isn't enough time, not enough food, not enough love for me. And because everything is still one big blob, the conclusion is also, I am not enough. I must be not enough. So the baby kind of caves in and starts to conserve energy and can't really take in from outside anymore. And the theory that Wilhelm Reich, who was one of the first psychiatrists, very exciting time, there was Big Papa Freud, but then the whole field was open. And he watched people come into his practice, and he saw that people with the same kind of bodies and had the same kinds of stories. And these two, I don't belong and I'm not enough, are very persistent because we're very young when we jump to these conclusions. And his theory is that all of us have jumped to either both or one of these two. And then the second series, the second three are overlays on that. So the third one is the child that, the classic example is of a child who is drawing a cat. And the mother comes and said, oh, what a lovely fox you're drawing. And the child says, it's not a fox, it's a cat. And the mother says, oh, give it to me. I'll put it on the fridge and daddy can see it too. So the child feels that it has, there was a product of its creativity, which was not recognized, was made into something else. And then the whole thing was also taken away. So it is no boss over its own creativity. And this is also the time of the potty training. And there's other things that happen to children where their boundaries are not respected by elders that they trust. And so they kind of go like, okay, I better not put anything out anymore because it will be misunderstood and it will be taken away. So I just guard everything and stuff it all back in. And so that results in this, okay, have it your way. What do I know anyway? So there's a powerlessness there. And the fourth one is about trusting others, actually. And this is the child who somehow gets, in our young years, you must have also played at this. We all, I think, have played at that. We were the firefighters and we were rescuing, the old people or the young people, or we were the doctors who would save the children, or the princesses. And fantasy and reality are just one continuum when you're playing as a kid. And so as a child, we often also give ourselves a role in the life of our parents. Like the boy will think, my father's away a lot. I'm the real man in the house here. I'm the real partner of my mother. And the girl will kind of dress up for her father, and he might, play with that a little bit too. But then in the end, of course, you're not the partner of your parent. And so there is this sense of betrayal, of really standing there kind of in your full nakedness with your love, figuratively, not literally, but with your love. And this is actually the child with the broken heart. So they think this must never happen again. I must be strategic and look to see how these relationships are. And these become very strategic people, but they don't really trust others. They don't really trust life. So there's always kind of a nervousness and a tension in them. And so they feel they must keep things under control. As long as they control life, they will be fine, which of course is an illusion in itself. And the child that grows up in a household where, the jokes that are made, the child doesn't really get or finds painful. It's like the value system where they grow up, and the inner value system of the child are not really a parallel. So they get to feel like, oh, maybe I'm a little weird. They don't think the others are weird because, they seem to be the norm. So I must be the odd one out. I must be a little bit weird. And this is also the time when, your sexuality starts to bud, and you might throw yourself at the parent of the other sex, and they might say, no, and want to keep a distance. Whereas like yesterday, this was all still okay. So you also feel there are boundaries. This time it's not the outside world violating or overstepping your boundary. But it's like you feel you've overstepped a boundary, only you didn't know it was there. So you better be really careful. So kind of you draw yourself in and you kind of fit in, become conventional, so nobody can ever say, you're kind of not Yeah. Sorry, sometimes I'm Dutch, so sometimes the English doesn't really flow as well as other times. But you're not adapted to the world. So that is, the conclusion is I must conform in order to fit in. And those are the thoughts.
Thank you. And, one of the things that came to mind when I was reading about these 5 conclusions, it reminded me a lot of conversations that I've had, with other spiritual people, teachers, and it reminds me of the egoic self versus the spiritual self and the ego.
Tell me more, because well, this is all part of the egoic self, of course. I mean, this is the way we start to build our ego, which is also necessary in order to transcend it at a later date. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, that's what it reminds me of, just kind of putting in maybe some different terms and different ways to think about it, in these 5 conclusions. But again, it always seems to be coming back to this unraveling of things that we have learned. And what I find most human beings are trying to do is trying to get back to this place of remembering that they're loving themselves, accepting themselves. I mean, it just seems like that's quite a journey for so many people. And that's what you talk about, in this book, and how to begin to shift that focus and change the thoughts. So maybe you can talk about that. How do we begin to turn our thoughts from these childhood conclusions and, allowing that to begin to change our lives?
Yeah. And, for me, it's not like, there is like a going back to remembering we are light, we are love, we are spirit. But it's also really about transcending and including, because I see this jumping to conclusions and this map that the childhood conclusions give us as, it's kind of our curriculum on this earth. We come here and we somehow need to make sense of what happens. And these are kind of 5 pathways that we take, but we also, they also help us to bring our gifts, the gifts that we come in with. So how to turn them? There's actually 2 ways, and one is the more spiritual way, and one is the more psychological way. So the more spiritual way is actually turning them, kind of melting them from the inside out by thinking exactly the opposite of what you've been thinking all the time. So if one of my patterns, one of my personal patterns is thinking I'm not enough, like I'm not prepared enough, I'm not well read enough. If only I'd read, that other extra book that somebody recommended, then I would have the authority to speak. So I used to think that. So what I do is to think the opposite. So for people who think they don't belong, they're not welcome, is to really go inside to that spiritual place, to our core, and visualize maybe a sense of truly and totally being welcome. Being as welcome as anything. And like everybody is welcome. Everybody who is here belongs. And then, and so to continue like that. So to think I'm welcome, I belong, I'm enough, I'm not too much, not too little, I'm exactly right as I am, I'm enough. I am free. My life is mine. That's the antidote to feeling powerless and thinking, you have it your way. To feel this sense of trust and faith, and to nourish the thought that life is trustworthy. I can trust, and also then the 5th one is also really to trust myself. I'm not off. I'm not wrong. I am exactly right, exactly as I am in my authentic self. So that's really a sowing of and kind of opening and widening them from the inside out. So that's the spiritual approach, the inside out approach, which as I do it right now already makes me feel so much easier and warmer. And it's something you don't need anything when you're commuting to work. just to be mindful, whether you're thinking I'm not enough or I am enough, makes all the difference for a day. We brush our teeth, we brush our hair, we choose what to wear. We can also choose what inner attitude am I going to wear today? What inner sentence am I going to start the day with and radiate out to others as well?
Yes, and you also talk about 4 different steps in shifting these childhood conclusions, and your book kind of takes each one of them and you work it through. And the 4 different steps that you have, and what you were just talking about, is step 1, to recognize the thought pattern, step 2, to shift the focus, step 3, to thank ourselves, step 4, to invite that emotion from back then, and 5, to be creative and live your life. And I think that the number 1 really is the key, and you were talking about that, which is recognizing the thought pattern and really having an intention behind it and starting your day and allowing a positive self-message to be that first thing in the morning is a great way to begin the practice. But with these 4 steps, I think, one of the childhood conclusions that a lot of people really struggle with, and who I see most people for anxiety, and that kind of goes back to that 4th childhood conclusion of needing to be in control, and the unpredictable parts of life, and people, who tend to have higher anxiety levels are always searching for their own conclusion of how the story should end or what needs to be done next. There's this planning, there's preparedness for A, B, and C. So,
trying to stay ahead of the curve, so to say. And life always comes from a different direction than you can foresee. Yeah.
So what if you took people through those, 5 steps of shifting the I must be in control?
Yes, I'm happy to. So as you say, the first step is actually to recognize the thought pattern. This once you can actually see your thoughts and hear your thoughts. So for anyone on a path of personal developments and spiritual growth, I think, that is kind of lesson 1. We are not our feelings. We are not our thoughts. And these thoughts also are not necessarily true. They're just things that we think. And in those things that we think, there are for instance, these 5 very distinct patterns. So when you feel like your energy go up, and also thinking you need to be ahead, you need to plan, you need to know, you need to be in control, or asking people, are you everything under control? That's a really good giveaway. Then kind of, okay, so it's the childhood conclusion raising its head again. So you must be in a situation that somehow triggers it. And so the first thing is also to have some empathy with yourself. And then to remember you are not that child. You are not this heartbroken through lots of ups and downs, through schooling, through whatever has been in your life. You've overcome it and you're here now. You're an adult and you live an adult life. So better kind of grow yourself into that adult that you are. And then the third step is actually to thank ourselves. Because especially childhood conclusion 4, I call the chapter the noble hearts. They are the warriors. They are the fighters and the heroines. They're the ones who want to save other people. They have a huge, big heart. They care. We care with this childhood conclusion. So if you jumped to the conclusion that, you couldn't trust your parents, that was at the time, the only reason you could think of for not being able to fulfill the heroic role that you'd given yourself. So again, it's good to be empathetic with the little child that you were and say, okay, I thank myself. I thank also this thought pattern for kind of getting me underway of developing my gifts of generosity and leadership and strategic insight. That's all because of this childhood conclusion. So let me just, as the adult that I am, thank this part of me. And the result of thanking, of gratitude, is that the part that used to be so big and that used to kind of want you to be bigger than life, even to save the day, will kind of calm down, because it is like any one of us. It feels then seen and acknowledged and recognized. And it also, in a way, when we personify it, kind of acknowledges, oh, there's an entity here who apparently knows what to do, and I can rest. So by thanking it, you kind of calm it down while you're still in your adult self. And so this is kind of, the first three steps are like the to-go method. You can do this anywhere. If you want to work deeper, you can also go to step 4. And as the adult that you are, with that gratitude and empathy for the child that you were, kind of go back to times when you have felt that anxiety that you were speaking about, when it really became so big that it took a hold of you, and you can allow it to rise up again, but hold it also, not become it. Those kinds of feelings also want to be felt, and once they are felt, they can kind of, they can't really sustain themselves. You feel that anxiety, you feel this urge to be a hero and, make everything all right for everybody. And you hold it and you hold it and you hold it. And at some point, it'll kind of calm down. And so that means that you've actually taken a bit of the tension and allowed it to be, and then it will fizzle out of itself, which means that the next time the tension you hold will not be as big. And so when you do this over time, it's like, dealing with a backlog of unexpressed emotion, of unacknowledged feelings. So you're actually clearing out the attic, so to say, if you allow yourself to feel that feeling, and you will not die a hero's death, but what dies is the illusion that you have to keep life under your thumb, because it is an illusion, and you need to be able to live with that and dance with that in a way. So those are those 4 steps.
Great, thank you. And you also have on your website for people to be able to test their own childhood conclusions fix. So can you tell our listeners about that if they're curious to take this test?
Yeah, it's actually a very easy test to do, and you don't need hours to do it either. It's on my website, Schuitemaker.com. You can take the childhood conclusions test, and answering 25 questions that I've developed with the researcher will give you a quick first impression of how these conclusions play out in your life, which ones are more upfront and which ones are less in your day-to-day makeup, so to say.
And you also have another survey that I'm very interested on as I was kind of going through your website, and you have a survey for the childless. Now, I would be one of those people, and I do not have children, and I will be taking a link, I'll be taking the survey through your link, and I understand that you're writing your next book on this and doing some research. So I'm really interested to hear some more about that.
Yes, I do not have children of my own either. And at some point, actually during the launch in London of my previous book, The Eldest Daughter Effect, we somehow got to talk about not having children as eldest daughters, as firstborn women. And this is very rare, that once you are past kind of the age of decision, I have hardly spoken about not having children. And still, I have a different life from my siblings who do have children. And I'm very grateful that they have children. So I still have children in my life, but they're not mine. And I have given myself a different set of experiences than had I had children. And so I started to talk to friends and colleagues and people I met on the way. And then people started to tell me their life story just like that. Just like that. And I've had no shortage of people who wanted to be interviewed around not having children, because it is a bit of a hidden topic. There's more and more of us, about 15 to 20% of adults in Europe and the US will not or don't have children of their own. So I feel an exception. But when I look at those figures, it's like, wow, 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 something, that's actually quite a lot of us. So I am, concluding the research. So take the survey quickly, because next week my researcher will be starting her analysis. And the survey has gone out worldwide, and it's gotten a big response. My researcher is very impressed with the hundreds of people who have taken it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's great. I will take it as soon as we get off of this call, I promise.
Great,
she said it's only about 10 minutes. But yeah, that's interesting because, in my support group and community, I am the only one without children, so sometimes it could feel like a very lonely world, and you're kind of seeking to find those friends throughout your life and I too, love my children's friends, and I kind of get to be a parent vicariously through them. But it's interesting how, as you go through your own adult development, and like you said, you create a new pathway to your own life and the experiences that you have. Sometimes you have to find a new tribe to run with and play with, because our friends that have children are really committed for many different periods of their life where they cannot come out and play with us as freely as we would like them to explore.
Exactly. Yes. No, it is good to find other people who are in a different time schedule and can pursue different interests than people who are, by definition, kind of immersed in rearing little beings.
Yeah. And, I'm not sure if your research, talks about this at all, but, from my own personal experience too, that sometimes there's that societal pressure of, well, if you're a woman, you should be bearing children. Like, isn't that part of your role? And, sometimes you do kind of get those looks like, oh, you've never had children? Huh, how come? Like every woman is supposed to either feel that burning feeling to be a mother or to want to have children. And in my personal experience, that really was I've never really felt that. I didn't have that like some of my other friends who knew that they just wanted to be a mom. And I'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah. No, but I know those looks and those kind of raised eyebrows and kind of, are you really a nice person if you don't have children? You don't even have pets? Can you be a kind and warm woman? I think, yes, I care about other things. And just this morning, I was actually reading an article from the American Journal of Sociology from the beginning of last century, where they said, there is a spectrum of women who really, really, really want to be a mother, and then women who really don't, and everything in between. And especially the ones in the between are like, am I or am I not? Like now we are actually discovering there is a spectrum in gender. It's not either, female or male, or feminine or masculine. There's like a spectrum in between. So we're starting to see with much more kind eyes towards a diversity of life forms and ways people shape their lives. But no, conventions run deep and are strong, and there's a lot of people who would love you to be like them, and questioning, I don't know, I'm not questioning parenthood, but just by existing and not doing it is a bit of a question mark.
Yeah, well, I thank you for going into that area, and we might have to have you back on to discuss that research because I would be very wonderful. Interested in that. Well, thank you, Lisette, so much. This has been really a fun interview, and thank you so much for taking us through these childhood conclusions, what the fix are, walking us through those examples, and really helping us to try to turn that negative self-talk around. So we will put all of your information in our show notes so people can find it very easy to get a hold of you. And if anybody else is out there, your survey might be concluded by the time we publish this podcast. But if it's still up on a website and there's childless people
have it
there,
up on a website, and please don't hesitate to still do it when I will have my researcher look at it a week later too, to see if more information has come in, because it's really great that you're publicizing it, April. Thank you so much.
If you want more information about our films, visit our website, path11productions.com, to purchase DVDs or to rent and stream each film. You can also find our trilogy of films on iTunes, Amazon Prime, and Gaia.com. You can still use our smartphone app for both Android and iPhones. Just search for Path 11 in the Google Play App Store, or if on an iPhone, look for Path 11 in the iOS App Store. Catch you next time.